Welcome to the Dunning Africa Center, a collaboration between research institutions, universities, and businesses to study the impact of globalization and international business from an African perspective. Your platform, your voice, and your opportunity to shape the untapped potential across Africa. Together, we are asking tough questions, sparking conversations, and igniting change to reposition African business as a significant and dynamic global player. Today, we shift our focus to the central theme of this month's webinar, a focal point that will be the heart of our conversation. Our distinguished panelists and hosts are drawn from across Africa and work in business, academia, and government. Dunning Africa Center, it's not a place, it's a continent-wide conversation. Join us every month as we cover the pressing questions facing African businesses today.
Welcome to Dunning Africa Center and our ongoing webinar series where we talk about the most pressing current issues concerning business in Africa. And today we have a very interesting topic, and a very interesting topic for me personally. It's something I have had great interest in from the beginning of my career, that is to say the role of FDI and growth. Now, I'm very lucky that I've got three brilliant panelists to join us today, and they're all experts on the Africa situation, but also more broadly about FDI, economic growth, economic development, and these sorts of things. So really, we're kind of lucky that we managed to gather these people together for the event. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time introducing everyone, but we have, I think what I'll do is I'll let everyone introduce themselves briefly. So, Frans, perhaps a couple of words you want to tell us about yourself.
Yes, thank you. I am from a retail background. I do work with Henley Business School and a couple of other business schools, and we've done quite a bit of research. I have traveled the African continent extensively, and I've been part of opening about 50 supermarkets in 11 countries on the continent, so I had quite a close experience of what happens from a business point of view and also FDI. Thank you.
Thanks, Frans. And now we turn to Roger.
Thank you, Rajneesh. Hello, everyone. My name is Roger Fon. I am currently an assistant professor in international business at Newcastle Business School, Northumbria University, here in the UK. Prior to joining Northumbria University, I was a fellow at the London School of Economics at the Department of Management, and my research interest is primarily the internationalization activities of firms from emerging markets investing in other emerging markets, usually referred to as South-South FDI. So I look forward to a very, very fruitful and interesting conversation.
Thank you, Roger. And now, last but not least, Katusha, a few words from you.
Hi, Rajneesh. Thank you. And thank you for putting together this webinar. So, yeah, I'm Katusha, and I'm assistant professor in international business strategy at Henley Business School. So Rajneesh knows me quite well. And so as part of my PhD, so location decisions was one of the main topics that so I was investigating too. But not necessarily with a particular focus on Africa, but more generally, so worldwide, looking at different activities across the value chain. And before joining Henley, I was a research fellow at Warwick Business School, and working with Nigel Driffield on spillovers and the benefits that local economy can gain from multinationals. And so this is why combining location decisions and development in a sense and growth, this is the way in which I can contribute to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katusha. Yes, so we have a wonderful team here. And I think one of the things that I want to emphasize here is that actually this topic is not just a hot potato for African countries, but also globally. Because, you know, everyone really comes down to the issue of FDI. Now, what sparked this webinar today was a report produced by Katusha and France, as well as with one of my colleagues, Davide Castellani, who's, I think, maybe online, joining us later on. But they produced a very interesting report, and the title of the report is The Evolution of FDI Across the Value Chain. And I'm going to let France give us kind of the highlights of this report. France, it's over to you.
Thank you, Rajneesh. So yes, we looked at FDI mainly in Johannesburg, as the sort of gateway to Africa, and but we also used Lagos and Nairobi just to benchmark. And between the three cities, they really are responsible for about 18% of the FDI that comes into Africa. So very, very important attractors. And there has been an upward trajectory. Not enough, though, but there has been an upward. And we're looking currently in Joburg at about 1.5%, you know, of GDP as FDI. So we looked firstly to understand the context. We look a bit at the history of Johannesburg and you know, its change from the apartheid regime to where it is today, and also the fact that different industries started in the city, like the minibus taxis and those sort of things, and that the main focus of the city moved from the inner city, which has become not as, you know, has sort of degenerated slightly, and it's moved to Sandton, which is often known as the richest square mile in Africa. But that's where our business is situated at the moment. We also saw that there's been a sort of a change from mining, which has been always dominant, to manufacturing, and then from manufacturing to the service economy. And Joburg has become a financial hub for various reasons, and we are attracting lots of money in the financial industry. In the problems, though, still are, you know, uncertainty, politics and policy, those sort of things. A lot of it's perception, as we know, because it really is a very good place to do business in. But then if we look at Nairobi and we look again, it's also commerce and finance. It again is the gateway to East Africa, where Joburg, the gateway to probably to sub-Saharan Africa, but the East African hub. Again, regulatory hurdles with infrastructure, and Lagos attracts 47% of the FDI of Nigeria, so quite big there. And any of you that's been to Lagos will know it's a very exciting city. But problems again with people being scared of corruption, power, security. And again, we know that a lot of the issues are, as I've said before, perception. So Joburg, out of the three, the biggest attractor of FDI. Then we've got Nairobi that's catching up there. Then we looked at who is actually investing. And funnily enough, China is very low on the list at number 15. We always think that it's very high, and it seems to be that many people think that. But we've got USA at 14.9%, UK at 11%, France at 11%. So it's mostly North America and Europe that's putting money in. Again, you know, the European links there before, you know, when the borders were created in Africa in 1884. And so very interesting set of figures there. And we see that there's there's potential for a lot more. But we need to work on government regulations in our big cities. We need to work on the business environment, we found, but we also, very importantly, there should be community involvement in these issues, and that's a whole other, and shared value, of course. So that's a brief summary of what we looked at. And I think, as I say, the important aspects here is that it is improving, but that we need a lot more work to get more FDI, because it is essential for the growth of of our countries, but it also needs to be responsible FDI. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fran. That's very useful. And I think it's really interesting, I think, kind of goes against the kind of the popular conventional wisdom that China has become a major player. I think China stands out more than it actually appears to be because it's a new investor and because there's a certain amount of political issues with it as well that people think China is a much larger player across Africa. And indeed, there was an expectation that they would be a much larger player. I just want to kind of, I think this is a true, I don't know the exact numbers for Lagos and for Nairobi, but I suspect that is also the case there. Now, one of the things, there are 2 points that I thought I will bring up. One is, of course, that we are looking at a shift in industry, which you mentioned, France, that used to be mining, used to be extractive industries, which is, what is to be expected across Africa because there's a comparative advantage in extractive resources. But the growth of services, of course, is something that, especially with FDI moving towards services, and this is kind of an interesting point. I want to come back to that later on because, and we're going to, and you'll see where I will bring this up because, in terms of the classic model that economists have is that first you have FDI in the primary sector, and then slowly the economy moves towards manufacturing and then slowly towards services, and then this kind of three-stage change in the structure of FDI and the change in reflects the change in the economy. But we're seeing, as you say, broadly, not just in Africa, not just in African countries, but across the world, there's tendency for there to be much more activity in services in the southern countries than there is than there should then, and manufacturing has not been as successful. Now I want to come back to that. I'm going to save that for later on, but first of all, let me bring up the issue of FDI. Are we really talking about FDI? I think maybe in terms of data, I was looking at the report and, to what extent are we talking about FDI and FPI? And just for the audience who may be less familiar, foreign direct investment and foreign portfolio investment. So when people invest in the stock market, it has a different, you're investing in companies as a portfolio. So maybe, Katusha, let me turn to you for a minute. Maybe you can say something about the difference between FPI and FDI.
So yeah, when we talk about the report in particular, then France was talking about. So in that case, we look at we can say mainly foreign direct investment. So because what we have, so we are looking at greenfield projects made by multinationals from all over the world. So investing in Africa, and so in particular, we look at Johannesburg, so Nairobi, and then Lagos as 2 benchmarks. So the focus of the report is particularly foreign direct investment. So because we track cross-border investment made by companies in different activities along the value chain, and so that we don't look at passive investors from foreign countries, so investing into Africa. So that's not part of the context of the report. So that was important to clarify.
No, I think it's an important point because I think one of the discussion, I'm going to turn to this issue when we think about FDI and development, there is an effect here. And maybe Roger, let me turn to you. Perhaps you can explain to our audience a little bit more about how FDI, what the relationship in FDI and development, the basics.
Yeah, thank you. There are the effects that are as a result of the direct impact of the activities of multinationals, and then there are the effects that are just unintended, right? These are usually referred to as spillovers. I guess we're going to come to spillovers later. But when we talk about the direct effects, or sometimes usually referred to in the international business literature as macro, so-called macro effects, we're looking at the impact of FDI on, for example, growth, right? There's a lot of evidence, empirical evidence there in the economics literature that suggests that FDI actually has a positive effect on economic growth. It brings in a lot of capital, right? Developing economies lack capital. So when you get more FDI, you get more capital coming in. And what you can do, if you're a tiny economy, you can save part of your GDP and still invest some of it through FDI, right? Which I think China has done this quite fantastically. China could actually really save a greater proportion of its GDP, but still invest a lot through inward FDI. So FDI is very, 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 very important. So these are the so-called direct effects or the macro effects of FDI. On the other hand, of course, there are the effects that are unintended, right? The so-called spillovers, or the economists usually refer to as externalities. And this could be horizontal or vertical. We're going to come to spillovers, I guess, at some point.
Yeah. Now, before we go there, what in terms of development effect, what's the difference between FDI and FPI? What is in portfolio investment and direct investment in terms of our development effects?
Well, direct
for countries, and the point I'm trying to bring is why do countries worry so much more about FDI rather than FPI? That's what I want you to answer for.
Absolutely. And I'm going to even add that why do developing economies like those in Africa worry a lot about FDI in particular, right? Well, FDI, and I would say a particular type of FDI, which is greenfield FDI, for example, where a company comes in, you set up a subsidiary or a factory or a plant from scratch, you employ local labor, you pay taxes. It gives control to the firm, but it doesn't really, what it does is it adds capacity to the industry, right? Rather than coming in and acquiring an existing firm. If you do it through a greenfield, if firms come and invest in a country, right? Dangote invest a huge plant in my country, Cameroon. What that did was it added another extra cement factory in Cameroon, which we only had one before, right? So it creates competition, it reduces the price of the product. We've got cheaper cement in Cameroon as a result of Dangote coming in. So it's hugely important for the direct investment part of cross-border activities, particularly to developing economies.
So I think, the portfolio investment, for those of you less familiar, portfolio investment is when a company invests in the stock market and buys shares in a company. But this can also be a passive relationship. That is, you're buying, as someone like me, I'm not a very rich man, but I could buy shares in the Joburg Stock Exchange, and let's suppose I was a rich man. I think that boat has sailed by now. But let's suppose I married Dangote's daughter, and then I am suddenly a multi-billionaire. Then I can perhaps go and buy shares of a company. But my goal in a portfolio investment is not to control the firm and its activities, but simply to increase the value of my holding. And I think the big difference between the two is one involves capital, only capital, yet another. Whereas direct investment implies technology and knowledge transfer as well, that you're bringing in knowledge transfer. So sorry, go on.
I think it's also worth mentioning that, the majority of developing countries, I think apart from South Africa, maybe Nigeria and Kenya and places like that, most African countries, in terms of our financial markets, are still very, very relatively weaker compared to our financial markets in more developed economies.
No, it's one of those things that people feel that it's the same thing, but that's why I wanted to underline that. One of the things that, and I will want us to address this later on, is that it's not only about capital and technology, but actually for many developing countries, the focus is on jobs or job creation. And I was just on the phone with somebody a few minutes before joining this webinar today, saying that, the reason why the Indian elections didn't go in favor of the ruling party is because they didn't create enough jobs. And, FDI, in many cases, people are looking towards for. But now we're talking about the effects of FDI. And I want to now turn to Katusha. So effects of FDI? What are the, do you want to quickly summarize what are the key effects of FDI?
Yeah, so I think Roger wanted to touch, so he mentioned spillovers, but this is one, I think one key element that can answer why FDI and not just portfolio investment. And so the idea is that, okay, why do governments want to attract FDI? And so one of the answers could be spillovers. So the positive effect the presence of the multinational can create in the local economy. So when we talk about spillovers or externalities, so we talk about the indirect effect of the entry of the foreign multinational in the local economy. And so I'm not going to talk about the direct effect. And so when we talk about spillovers, so we're talking about the positive effect, for example, in terms of productivity growth or economic growth that the presence of the multinational can generate in the host economy. And so the importance of the knowledge on technology transfer that can happen from the entry of the multinational firm into a particular local context. And so this can happen through different mechanisms, through different channels. And so, but it's important to understand how the presence of the multinational can impact the local economy. And so I wanted a brief, let's say, announcement, say, okay, the literature, the academic literature talking about spillovers and FDI has been quite rich over the past 20 years. And so, but there are two key premises that we need to remember. So the first one is that when we talk about multinationals, so we're talking about firms with some sort of firm-specific advantages, and which creates some sort of technology on productivity advantage. And so those firms are different from other firms. And these firm-specific advantages are embedded in FDI flows. And so when we have an FDI, so we have potentially, so those technologies, those knowledge that are embedded in those investments. And so how? So they are embedded, for example, in capital, if we talk about tangible assets, technology, or they are embedded in managerial practices. So when we talk about intangible assets, or even in terms of products, so products of the multinational. So then again, we talk about a specific quality and standard of the products that can be different from local firms, for example. And then the second point, the pillar, is that, okay, so some sort of knowledge transfer or technology transfer can potentially happen when the multinational can interact with local firms. And so these are two key elements that we need to remember. And so then what are the mechanisms? Very quickly. So we have we can say that in the literature, we can find four main channels, mechanisms that can facilitate knowledge and technology spillover. And so, yeah, the generation of spillovers. And so the first one is competition effect in the host economy. And so the idea is that when we have a foreign company entering that market, and so domestic firms are incentivized to compete with those firms. And so investing in, for example, innovation, they have some sort of incentives in order to improve their efficiency. And so to compete with multinationals in a more successful way. And so this is the first mechanism. The second mechanism is about the mobility and the movement of labor. And so again, here the idea is that we have an outflow transfer of knowledge that can occur through the mobility of workers. So when we have employees, for example, that are working for and they are trained by a multinational, so they can move from the multinational to another domestic company, or for example, they can start a new business. And of course, when they are moving to the company, so they are bringing with them all the knowledge and training that they had when they were working with the multinational. And so again, here the idea is that there is some evidence that multinationals tend to employ a higher share of skilled workers. And then there is some evidence saying that multinationals tend to provide training activities. And so again, when they have those knowledge, they can transfer that knowledge. And so again, the workers are the mechanism here. And so in a sense, the overall quality of the human capital at the local level can increase. So due to this mechanism. And so then we have other two, the final two. So the third one is about the demonstration effect. So the idea here is learning by imitating. So the idea is that the local firm can observe the foreign company, so through the operations of the different subsidiaries operating there. And so what they can do, they can observe and they can try to imitate, for example, some business or managerial practices, or using some specific technologies, or for example try to imitate even some product to increase the quality that the company is able to produce. And so again, we have a mechanism here that could be potentially a reverse engineering mechanisms where initially what we have, the local firm can try to imitate the technology or the product, and then made by the multinationals. And so again, there could be some limits there, just thinking about protections in terms of patenting or other intellectual property. But again, potentially, this is another mechanism that can be in place. So learning by imitating from the multinationals. So not just in terms of products or technologies, but even in terms of practices. And finally, so we have, if you like, the supply chain linkages. And so in a sense, when we have a multinational entering the local economy, there is potential for creating backward and forward linkages with local firms. And so this can happen when foreign companies source intermediates, inputs, goods from the local market through backward linkages, or they can sell products or inputs to other firms down the value chain through foreign linkages. And so again, the idea here is that the relationships, so the buyer-supplier relationships involving foreign firms and local firms can be another potential mechanisms for productivity spillovers and technology diffusion. And so again, this also can create another benefit, which could be the potential for new markets. And so for local new entrants to locally source supply, so the product, and create new businesses, in relation to the presence of the multinational. And also, again, we have another indirect effect, and so is about the quality and the standards and the managerial practice.
Okay,
yes.
leave that for now. We'll come, that's the advanced part of the lecture. We will say, let me now, kind of one of the two things I want to emphasize here. One is, of course, that these are let me pay tribute to a guy called Albert Hirschman, who was key in developing the issue of linkages. That many of the benefits, direct benefits of FDI come from linkages, creating linkages into either the consumption linkages, because a company will need printers and the workers will need food, and there are effects that come because they consume. And then there are, of course, fiscal linkages because they're paying taxes. But there are also, as you say, backward linkages, vertical, where you connect with other firms and create new suppliers. But I think this is something that people underestimate the value of what you call demonstration effects. That is to say, firms learn. I remember when I was very much younger, and they started assembling cars in Nigeria. The Peugeot factory was set up, and Volkswagen factory. And suddenly, the number of mechanics who knew how to competently service cars went up. You didn't have to go now to the dealer, because there was a dealer and they had to drive 100 kilometers to the nearest town where there was a authorized dealer. But now there were all of these small people who had worked in an assembly plant, and now they had branched out and opened their own small mechanic garage. And so you could see this demonstration effect, really seeing that there's that all of these unrelated or semi-related businesses started evolving around this company. And now you could drive anywhere, in any small village, you could find someone who could fix your car competently. And this is a good example of that. Now, one of the thing about linkages, and this is where I want to go to, is it's not guaranteed. And I want to turn, this is one of the points. So, Roger, I want you, perhaps you can say something about the fact that not all FDI leads to good things. And there's a condition, I think the main condition, I think, in my view, is always absorptive capacity. Maybe you can explain for a law audience why I'm raising this point.
Yeah, thank you, Rajneesh. I think before I go to the concept of absorptive capacity, I just want to add a little bit more on Katusha's comprehensive answer. Demonstration effects are the likely some of the ways in which technology can move, or the impact of FDI on the host economy. But there's something else I want to add, which is this idea of what are the incentives from the multinational perspective, right? Because if you look at it, if I'm part of the multinational supply chain, it's in the multinational's interest, right, that I am efficient, that I am productive, and that my just-in-time delivery works, my logistics works. But it is not in the multinational's interest for its technology and its other so-called firm-specific advantages that it has to diffuse to its competitors through the product market, right? So I just wanted to highlight that particular distinction. Now, the ability of this technology from the firm to diffuse to the local economy or to diffuse to local firms is contingent on this idea of absorptive capacity, which is it's literally what it says, right? What is your ability are you capable of absorbing the knowledge and the technology that the multinational is bringing into the host economy as a local firm, right? Can you understand it, right? Can you assimilate it? And can you apply it, right, to your own business? And what we tend to find in most developing economies, and particularly a very high number of African countries, is we don't really have firms that can really apply the technology that they learn from big multinationals coming in, because they have very, very low absorptive capacity. Why is that? Largely because in most developing countries, the human capital is usually relatively lower. And there's a very strong relationship between absorptive capacity and the level of human capital, as well as the quality of institutions as well. Education, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things that I think which so it's a kind of a critical condition for benefiting from FDI really is having, and just to give the audience a sense of it's like trying to go to a library, a university library with an undergraduate degree, or going to the university library with a primary school education. The amount of things you can absorb will be fundamentally different. And this is one of the challenges, of course, is that. So I think perhaps maybe what the point here is the multinational is looking to find the best people they can for its own purposes. So they tailor, and I think this is not just true for Africa, but this is true across the globe. And I think I'll ask Katusha to comment on this. Is that actually the multinational looking? It's not there for development, and I think it's a really good point to underline that the M&E is not seeing opportunities for promoting development. Their goal is to maximize their own return, and their return is maximized by hiring the smartest people they can find, the most appropriate people they can find for that, and they will select the kind of subsidiary that they set up to reflect what is available to them, not what they have been promised or what that might be there in 10 years' time. And government say, oh, in 10 years' time, we will have a better university. But 10 years' time, nobody's interested in what will happen in 10. What do you have now? And I think this is one of the policy issues which I often have, that governments try to market the attractiveness for multinationals, for FDI, by saying, we will have this in 10 years' time. We will have reliable electricity in 10 years' time. But no, the multinational is saying, why do we care about 10 years' time? We want, if we have to generate, as we do in Nigeria, you have to set up your own generating plant to function in Nigeria because the electricity is so unreliable. So it becomes an additional cost. So this is what are things about absorptive capacity is really, this is what we call location advantages. Now, one of the things I think I'm going to turn to Katusha on this point is that global, what multinationals want is the same. It's not in every place. In a sense, what they're looking for is the same thing. And Katusha has done a lot of research which kind of looks at what we call global cities and how, different cities. So maybe you guys tell us a little bit about what the global trends are. And we'll come back to Africa then.
Yes. So, well, we can talk about global cities, or in a very specific context when we talk about a particular type of location, and then maybe more broadly we can go to the discussion about location drivers in general, and so more broad. So the idea is that when we look at FDI, and so attraction of FDI, and so where those FDI are going. So there is a related conversation and on global cities. So, and more generally, so big, large cities as the core economic center for the core for economic growth. And so one of the idea behind global cities is that they have been seen as preferred locations for multinational companies due to a set of characteristics that make global cities different from the rest of the other cities. And so in particular, if you think about the environment that you can find as a company in the global cities, you have there a more cosmopolitan environment, and you have a more diverse environment where you can find different skills and different availability of human capital, which is critical, especially for some kind of activities. And then you have also a high availability of global advanced service provider, which are particularly important for companies that are operating in different countries. So because it's a way for them to get all the services that they need more or less in a standardized way in different countries. And they also have a higher level of connectivity. So because you are located in a place which is highly connected with other locations worldwide. And so those characteristics make global cities particularly attractive for multinationals. And the other point is that, in a sense, even if you're talking about global cities in different countries, they are, in a sense, more comparable between them than if you compare global cities with, for example, another cities in the same country. And so, again, it's about who is competing with whom. And so is, for example, Johannesburg competing with, Barcelona or other global cities in Europe, or is competing with other small cities in the rest of in the African continent. So again, this is a conversation that is in place, and not just for Africa, but for other countries in general. And I have some, yes.
Let me interrupt you for a second here, because one of the interesting things that seems to be is that we have actually, not everyone is a global city. We could have cities being regional, kind of the best in the region or the best. So we can see this happening, as you say, from the report. Joburg is really important in the story, and Cape Town, as we all know, these are the major cities where a lot of investment goes to these big cities, and the same thing with Nairobi, same thing with Lagos. But there also then is within countries, you can see a national kind of, the big boy will take a lot of the investment because the infrastructure is higher, the quality of educated people is higher, the quality of international connections, supply chains, etc. I was in Spain recently, and I was told that the freshest seafood is not found on the coast, but is found in Madrid, because the demand is in Madrid. It's a global city. That's where the best prices are. So all the best, and the transportation is so well designed that actually they catch a fish on the seashore, and then within 3 hours it's on somebody's in a restaurant. Now, this is a kind of the connectivity that you have. Now, we can see this now happening in many, okay, even Nigeria. I don't think I grew up in the north of Nigeria. I did not see a fresh fish. One of those rare things, because there was the connectivity was poor. The transportation links, getting anything will be frozen fish. Even frozen fish requires transportation, has to get there frozen still. It cannot be unfrozen. And you can see the challenges. So you will often see in many countries where they haven't got the resources to invest, that there will be one city that actually de facto is the dominant destination for FDI. Now, maybe this is an interesting thing that cities in Africa or governments or can think about focusing their energy on developing one major city because resources are limited, or for political reasons, maybe they're interested in emphasizing 2 or 3 or 4 cities. I don't know. Let me see. This is a question I think we should ask ourselves. Should we spread out the wealth and say, oh, but there's a backward region, we should have a major city there. But how do you get there? How do FDI get there? How does the investors get there? How do we move goods? I know I see Sony has commented on this in the chat function that the Chinese multinational are really well connected in global value chains, but at the same time, they are dependent upon there being the infrastructure to be connected. So, France, we've been silenced for too long. Come, let me free you of your bondage. Tell us a little bit of what you think on this matter.
I think we should spread it. We need to develop various parts in a country. It can't just be concentrated in one. And especially, and you've alluded to it earlier on, in Africa, where we need jobs. And so I do think we should spread, and therefore we should invest in infrastructure. In South Africa, we're fairly fortunate that we have links between cities. So whether it's Durban, Cape Town, Johannesburg, or even Kimberley, it's Bloemfontein, one can get there. But I do think we should try as countries to make our more than one city attractive to foreign direct investment. And therefore, as I say, benefit the people of those cities. Because what do we want to do in our countries? We want to uplift and we want to empower. We want to reduce inequality on our continent. That's such a huge enemy. So we really need to spread. We can't just have it all concentrated in Johannesburg. If you look at South Africa, it's not a healthy situation. So we need to invest infrastructure. We need to invest in, very importantly, I believe, we need to invest in skills of our people, to make them more employable and to be employed by multinationals. We often don't educate for the skills that are needed by the big industries that will come into our countries. So we need to do that as well. But I fully support the notion that we should spread the FDI across a country and not just concentrate it in one place.
So now we come to the question of resources in a way, because and this is obviously, I mean, there's a political motivation to have, okay, each region of the country should have whose region are you going to prioritize? Can we do all the regions? No, we have 30 plus states. I've lost track of how many states. Every time there's an election, they invent a new state. So who do you prioritize, in this process? And where does the money come? So do you provide an airport to every city? Every major city, and then think that that I built an airport, people should invest, or so there's a kind of a question of chicken and egg, really, that you need to have the infrastructure, but why build infrastructure as somewhere that isn't going to lead anyway, spending billions of dollars on a new airport, and when there's no chance of it, there's no electricity, there's no running water, and so on. Now, I think that this is really kind of an interesting thing, which we do need to address, because again, we come to the complementary assets issue, that
Indeed.
FDI and the benefits of FDI will come from there being complementary assets available to with which they can combine, and that the multinational is able to make a profit. Because the multinational does have choices as to where it can go. It's not, in very few cases, that is there a location that has such an important location advantage that it overrides the absence of electricity or roads or schooling or whatever. And that would be then in the mining industry. But the cost of mining is so large that this is a completely different story. So maybe this is a question we can go to is, to what extent have we been able to leverage mining? I think South Africa is a critical story here, to have upstream activity, to have more value adding done to the no, France and Roger. Let me turn first to let's do it to Roger first, because it's less about South Africa. Sometimes is an outlier in everything in the continent. So let me start with Roger. To what extent is the extractive sector proving to be an opportunity for further upgrading, for having more employment opportunities, having higher value adding activities? Roger.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Rajneesh. I think this comes down to political will and policy, really, because what we have seen for a while in Africa is lots of multinationals coming in. Okay, we're focusing on mining. I could also talk about cocoa beans in Cameroon or cocoa beans in Ghana or Ivory Coast. We have the raw materials there. They come in, they take the beans or they take the minerals and they leave. So perhaps through policy, we could actually try to find a situation whereby these multinationals can at least create an environment, a conducive environment where they could do a bit of a more value-adding activity in Africa rather than take their raw materials away.
So I agree with you, but the question is, of course, why are no domestic firms doing this? When cocoa beans is one of my bugbears, is that Africa produces most of the world's cocoa beans, but there's not a single African chocolate brand.
I think.
Yeah.
I think. Let's focus on Africa, for example. I don't think. If we're let's focus on cocoa beans. There's a certain, which I know a little bit about. There are technologies that these firms have that our firms in Africa don't. Right? So they have certain firm-specific advantages that our firms in Africa are not at that level of maturity quite yet to be able to carry out that type of level of activity. Perhaps with time, that is going to be the case. There are examples of African firms that are doing high value-adding activities, Dangote Group, for example, but these are all exceptions.
Dangote, but there are too few Dangotes, and the fact of the matter is,